Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
And I'm Mia Scott, guys. Welcome back. And for our first-time listeners, welcome.
There can't be any first-time listeners. Everyone in the world listens to this podcast.
That'd be great. They
That'd be
probably would
crazy.
learn a decent
We would
amount.
actually probably make money then.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We wouldn't just be doing this for
We
fun.
need some sponsors.
But anyway, all right. So we have a really cool episode today. Maybe a little bit less scientific than a little less physiologic than some of our episodes. A little more conversational, but cool nonetheless, right?
Mhm.
What are we going to talk about?
We are going to talk about a little controversy here, but ivermectin and basically the death of scientific method.
The death of science.
Yeah, the death of science. And before we get into this, I was talking to Tim about, okay, how do we set the stage on, how to introduce this to our listeners?
We have mentioned ivermectin in the past, and we said we'll do an episode on it, but what is the background?
Yeah, and why do we care about this? And it's not even about the drug because, the drug is obviously amazing and we'll get into that, but it's more of just everything that happened. So before we even get into our discussion with ivermectin, we want to talk about why this conversation matters to us. And, a lot of us that were practicing medicine during the COVID time, it wasn't just a pandemic for a lot of medical providers. That was a mass turning point for us where we just kind of realized that something necessarily doesn't feel wrong, but it certainly doesn't feel right.
The math wasn't mathing.
Yes, the math wasn't mathing. And we certainly watched a global response or a global pandemic unfold in real time. But what stood out to us is it wasn't actually the virus. It was how the information was handled, how the media handled it, and so many things. And don't get me wrong, we can do a billion podcasts on diving into the controversy and what happened with the pandemic in general. But we want to talk about ivermectin because it definitely, deserved way more light than it was given. And we want to talk about providers like us who supported that and things of that nature.
Yeah. And in order to understand that, I think there's a couple different things because the big phrase that came out during COVID pandemic was trust the science, right?
Yeah.
So someone sort of said this and then that was the thing. And you were either with it or against it. And the people who were against it were clearly chastised, ridiculed, outcasted. Some physicians were entirely canceled. Their careers were taken away. Their licenses were stripped. And I'm sure you've probably heard of some big names, but Dr. Peter McCullough is a big guy. He has a foundation now. He does a lot of this fringe research, so to speak. But I have to tell you guys, in as early as March, April, May, probably like April and May of 2020, there were people who were figuring out real world solutions to treat COVID. Like front lines, you can look it up. There was papers, there were multi studies over the world, different countries, different people, nothing to really gain in it, just really trying to figure out how do we stop this virus. And, go look this up for yourself, but azithromycin, ivermectin, vitamin D,
zinc,
vitamin C, zinc, these were real studies that were showing real results. And we're focusing on ivermectin. This one was really interesting. In the state of Ohio, if you ordered after, this was probably like late 2020, maybe even into 2021, if you ordered ivermectin, you could lose your medical license.
Yep.
And then we're going to talk about why that's crazy because it wasn't like this drug was just discovered in 2020.
Yeah, it's not like we were just like playing Russian roulette on our patients. Like, there was a theory behind all of this. So it's crazy to watch unfold. And like I said, we are just scratching the surface. And I mean a baby scratch of the surface. Like Tim and I have been through the weeds for many, many years, almost feeling like an outcast. And it's coming out, more into fruition and out as, we get more educated and the public gets more educated. We can put the pieces together to be like, dang, like we're not wrong. And it's just another, side of the things, how, medicine can be so ridiculously corrupt. And not to say don't ever trust your provider. That's not what we're saying at all. But we're saying like there's always more to a story if the story doesn't sound correct. So anyway, let's dive in.
Yeah. And I think it should be noted that this, not only ivermectin, but the COVID vaccine and the whole response to the pandemic is pretty much what got you down the pathway of there has to be a better way to do this. Yep. And then, of course, once you got far enough down that pathway, I had no choice but to come, or else I probably wasn't going to have a wife. So,
It's crazy. And before we dive in, I just want to say that, like, I'm not kidding when I say I hate to say that I'm thankful for COVID, but COVID truly made me the person that I am today because it really made me practice different, think outside the box, think more of critical thinking, even though my entire career was critical thinking. It just didn't seem right. And I have to say that I was right. And it took a very long time and you had to step outside the box and feel like, listen, I'm okay with being an outcast because this doesn't seem right.
It's where you realize that you can't just trust the institution of medicine because I think coming up, like I never had really thought to question it.
Yeah.
What I was taught in medical school, residency, papers that pharmaceuticals, and I always understood there's some bias, there's some money behind it,
Sure.
but you think like, but we're still doing the best medicine, the best research, the best things. But then you started to see like our country's results in COVID, like our death rate, our ICU rate, our COVID long haul. You start comparing it to third world countries, who had things like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and you're wondering
Yeah.
like,
You're like, what are we
what
doing?
is happening here? And then that led to multiple other, things. And excuse me if, you guys hear me with my hiccups and
Here we
stuff.
go again.
I actually have a pH monitor on me today. I had an EGD Bravo. So I have this like piece of nickel attached to my inner esophagus, and it measures like the pH in my esophagus because I'm gonna figure out this GERD for the life of me.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll share those results later.
And I know that we're not just the only providers who think like this. We were just out to dinner last weekend with one of our good friends who are also medical providers, and he said the same thing. COVID was a turning point. He realized the people that you truly cannot trust, you cannot, it's not that you can't trust them, but we cannot trust these people so blindly as we have been doing my entire medical career.
That's where I learned you cannot just trust the science.
No.
And when people say trust the science, that's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to just trust science. Right. You're supposed to question data, and we're going to get to that. Yep. So without further ado,
let's dive in.
So first, we're going to talk about one of the most controversial drugs in modern medicine. It's ivermectin. We sort of knew this drug was big. It won the Nobel Prize. It saved millions of lives. Huge. It's been trusted around the world. But then suddenly it became completely outlawed. Like I said, you could lose your medical license for prescribing it.
Yeah, it became a weaponized narrative. You were either like smart and dismissed it, or you're labeled like you're so reckless for questioning this, and we're going to strip you of your medical license for prescribing ivermectin that's, given to infants and so safe. It's just wild.
Yeah, like I said, you can't just not question it. That's the whole point of medicine and research, is to question it. So it brings me to the first point, and this started sort of in that COVID, that 2020 narrative. But anytime you question something today, you hear the same line: show me the studies, show me the data. What does the research say? But my question is, how much faith should we be putting in that research today? The scientific method today is not what the scientific method used to be when it first came out, when we first started practicing real double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trials. It hasn't changed, but the way it's practiced, funded, and communicated absolutely has. And that's where a lot of this tension and this disarray comes from.
Yeah, it's exactly like he just said. Okay, so let's talk about, what scientific method, what actually is that? And the first thing, let's define it. So because people throw this phrase around, like Tim said, like it's a weapon, trust the science, all the things. So name all of the potential studies that we go over that we'd like to see, or the more common ones that we see.
Right. Well, there's different kinds of studies that you can do. You can have observational studies, right? You can have cohorts. You can have prospective studies. The gold standard was traditionally double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized, studies like this. And again, every single different kind of study has its purpose. Every single different kind of study can have its bias, and every single different kind of study can have its errors. Now, the scientific method at its core, at its most simplest, it's actually beautiful. It's observation, right? So you ask a question. It's hypothesis and experimentation. It's analysis and then conclusion. And the key to it is its replication. And the most important part, what people forget, is that you're supposed to try to prove yourself wrong. Mm-hmm. You have to do everything you can to prove your hypothesis wrong. And then and only then can you accept the null, which is that your hypothesis is correct.
Mm-hmm. Yep, which is crazy when you think about that. Like all the studies that you do, you try to prove that you are wrong. The saying, are you going to say the saying?
Yeah, or just basically early science wasn't about proving you were right? It was about not being able to be proved wrong, where I think nowadays people just want to be like, what can I do with the data to prove my hypothesis correct?
Prove I'm right.
And then that leads to studies that are not replicable. It leads to weak data, weak results, weak conclusions, and
very
weak links.
Manipulative studies.
Yeah, and very manipulative results.
Yeah. The academic person, Karl Popper, he had a saying that said, "No number of experiments could ever prove me right. A single experiment can prove me wrong."
And that's how it should be. But I don't think that's what it is nowadays. I think it's like people will take these negative results or these, something that proves them wrong, and they'll wash it away, sweep it under the rug, and point back to the reasons why they're right. Mm-hmm. And you don't build this theory by stacking weak evidence in your favor. You have to try to destroy it. Richard Feynman, he's a quantum physicist. He was a Nobel laureate in the past. He said the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And that's just what I think of when I think of the scientific method, nowadays, is people just like, right away, you think you're right. You have this hypothesis, you think you're right. You're going to set out to prove it, and you're going to change everything to prove that right. I can't even tell you, if you ever read the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, which I know you have, and I don't know how many people in our audience have, but they mention how, various studies that were controlled by Fauci, how the endpoints were changed multiple times, data manipulated. You can talk about, and we actually do talk about this, absolute risk versus relative risk. Science, people just have to understand, saying trust the science. Science is not just science. It is very manipulatable.
It is.
Manipulatable, is that a word? I feel like I'm just making words up.
If it's not a word, it sounds right. But I highly suggest our listeners listen to that book, The Real Anthony Fauci. I read that when we were going through the pandemic, and I mean, it flipped I feel like my world upside down. Because you're supposed to trust somebody who's on the TV every single day spitting all these things. And then once you actually dug down and took a much deeper dive on his history, because remember, guys, history repeats itself. And you read that book, you'll figure out exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that wasn't the first time.
He knew what he was doing.
Fauci
this is not his first time
doing a vaccine.
And so I encourage you guys to read that so you understand what we're talking about. And this is us as medical providers. My husband's a doctor and working on the front line. I was in the emergency room working on the front line, and every single day I'm like, this isn't right. This doesn't seem right. Yet I was one of the crazy ones to say, is anybody not questioning this? This just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. And you fact checked me on this, look me up. I can't say this with absolute certainty, but I don't think Anthony Fauci ever one time got on the TV and said to take vitamin D or zinc, yet he took both of those things throughout the entire pandemic, and it's noted somewhere in some memoirs or some journals. But I used to say that. So in the emergency department, and we're talking like 2021, people are coming in, still COVID. It's not quite as deadly as it was in 2020. And, the scare was a little bit down, but I'm telling people, like, take vitamin C, take vitamin D and zinc. And they're looking at me like I'm nuts. Like, what is that going to do? And I'm like, listen, there's data out there. King Fauci is taking it,
And zinc kills, the viral load, but there's a certain time frame, which, that matters too. But it's just the suppression.
So agreed. Let's get back to the scientific method real quick. Just want to hammer this point home because I have mentioned in previous podcasts, I wanted to talk about when people say trust the science, sort of the fallacy around that or where that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So real science used to look like this, right? Present a hypothesis, try to break your hypothesis, challenge your own assumptions, and invite criticism. You wanted to find the best minds out there to challenge what you are saying, and you wanted them not to be able to prove it wrong. Mm-hmm. If the best minds in the world couldn't debunk your hypothesis, then you were really onto something. And then guess what? You could take your findings, you could improve your study, and you could replicate them. And you would always accept uncertainty. You would always say this is true to a certain degree, and that was real science. You didn't really necessarily need to be 100% right. You needed to be statistically right, and you needed to be accurate.
Yeah. And if your idea could not survive being attacked from multiple different angles, then it just didn't deserve to live.
And people knew that, and they were okay with that. It wasn't like a controversy and a fight anymore, and then somewhere I just feel like ego got in the way, and that evolved.
Well, big money got in the way, that's for sure. Okay, so what does it look like today? Problems, lots of problems. So number one, confirmation bias, baked into other study designs.
Almost every study design, yeah.
Cherry picking endpoints, which is wild. I mean, you can break this down. The p-hacking, which is essentially statistical manipulation, changing things in data in your paper to reflect the answers that you want. Selective reporting, meaning you quite literally omit certain things that you don't want to be reported.
And you quite literally omit entire studies altogether. So a lot of people don't understand this, but pharmaceutical companies might be like, let's say they're partnered with 10 different research universities. And, I don't want to name any specific, but let's say a Big 10 university and a Big 12 university. And let's say they first have the Big 10 university doing this study, and the things there are found did not jive with what the pharmaceutical company wants. Guess what? They can take those results, essentially put them in the file drawer, go over to the Big 12 university and have them run the study again. They'll change some endpoints. Like Mia said, there might be some selective reporting. They might change the study design, and then they get the results they want. Mm-hmm. It's just wild.
And I just had to say this point because I had to look it up because I just wanted to remember if I was right. Going back to Fauci real quick, by the way, his wife sat very high up on the NIH.
Yeah.
So, and this is what we're talking about by manipulative data. And there was also a web of people that were all tied into all of these things. So that actually falls into the modern problems, because you have big high ups that are tied to financial gains and all of these things. And this is why this gets flawed. These studies come out and there's a gain, there's a push, there's an end product, and we are not the people that they're trying to, look out for. Unfortunately, I hate to say it. And this is just another fact. Anthony Fauci is getting royalties on every vaccine sold. I think it's like 150,000 a year, capped for life.
Yeah, it does cap.
Royalties.
And certain people underneath them got it too. Yeah.
So just to let you know, when you follow the money, and I mean really follow things, it tells a different story.
You follow the money.
But when you follow the money, these studies are going to be very jaded when people sit so high up, and the manipulative web is just profound.
Yeah. And you mentioned p hacking. So, the p value is your statistical certainty, and you generally need a p value less than 0.05. And basically, a really good example of this is, we've talked about the Women's Health Initiative of 2002, where basically, they released this data at a press conference without even talking to the primary people involved in the study, their primary statisticians, their primary researchers. They came out and said, we're going to stop this study. And they didn't even have statistical significance saying hormone therapy caused
I think
breast
it was
cancer.
one of the only studies that said almost reached, which is null, void. Okay, so it didn't.
So that means it didn't. So that means it doesn't count. But they're like, this is so important that even though it's not the defined and agreed upon standard, we're going to say it counts. Yeah. And in all other research in the world, that wouldn't count.
And look what happened. It destroyed women's hormones
a generation.
Decades. I mean, we're still trying to get
reeling
it back.
from it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So Dr. Avram Blooming, who, wrote the book Estrogen Matters, he went around debating people and talking about this for a while. And I guess a question was asked of one of the people who was involved in the Women's Health Initiative. How do you explain, this? Why did you guys move forward when it wasn't statistically significant? And the response was, well, when, something that big comes up, the statistical police just have to leave the room. So you're just straight up admitting.
That's literally what they said. Yeah. And it wasn't
weird.
even statistically.
So anyway, guys, the whole point of that is you can't just trust the science all the time. And I did want to talk about one other thing, because this comes up a lot: relative risk versus absolute risk. So I want you guys to remember this, if nothing else, when you start to hear reduces your chance of mortality by 50% and things.
Question relative
versus absolute. So relative risk makes effects look very dramatic, while absolute risk shows the clinical implications, which can be a much smaller impact. Let me give you an example. A drug claims 50% reduction in deaths. That's the relative risk. But it went from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 2,000. So instead of 1 in 1,000 people dying, 1 in 2,000 people die. That's the 50% reduction in deaths. Now, listen, every life matters. I'm not saying that is not something that should be noted. If you're that human being, cool. But my point is, it sounds a lot different when you talk about relative risk versus absolute risk. Another example, Pfizer's COVID vaccine studies, they claimed 95% effective.
Which sounds great, right? Sounds great.
But it was a relative risk reduction reported, and it's a marketing maneuver. The baseline risk was 0.88%, and it went to 0.04% in the vaccine group. But what about the time, the people in the group, all of these different confounding variables, all of their exposures, all of their comorbidities? Like, none of this is reporting. So anyway, I don't want to get too much into that, because I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding that. We just want to bring up the idea that you can't just necessarily believe.
Correct. And actually, this just falls into a perfect example. I was with a patient a couple days ago, and they were asking about, they were on a cancer drug they are just absolutely miserable. And I asked her about her oncotype and all of the things. And I asked, okay, well, if they gave you a risk, because it was like, she had like a 42% risk reduction or something like that. And I said, well, did you ask relative versus absolute? Meaning, if you weren't on that, and I was explaining this to her, and she's like, no, the provider, because this is true informed consent, seeing what your actual options are. And apparently she was going to be on this for a very long time and miserable. So I said, well, did your provider tell you if you didn't take that, what your risk would be versus being on it, and the risks, versus reward? It was like a 2% difference of being lifelong free if she stopped the drug. And I'm like, that is insane that they don't.
So you're going to give up all of these beneficial effects of estrogen for this very, very small risk reduction.
Right. And so that's why I'm like, you always have to ask. And I've been in the provider's office with my a family member before going over these things, and he was going over the studies and saying, she has to take this for life. There's a big chance of reoccurrence. And I said, well, what's the reoccurrence without this drug? Because they'll throw these risks in at you. And once you look at that differently, you're like, well, that's it. It's a 1% or 2% or maybe 5%. But if your life is miserable, that is true informed consent. And that's what drove me nuts about all of this. The true informed consent wasn't there. And manipulative data, it was fear mongering. And it was just wild.
I agree. So to take home point on that, relative risk reduction is a marketing tool. Absolute risk reduction is a clinical reality. And then if you're really getting into it, number needed to treat is a decision-making tool. How many people do we need to give this drug to get the positive effect that we're looking for? And then what side effects or negative things come along with that? Yeah. So another thing that you'll see sometimes manipulated in medicine is small effect sizes exaggerated. So maybe tiny, barely meaningful changes, often presented as major breakthroughs. And it might say something like a weight loss drug shows a 1.5 pound difference over 6 months, but it gets marketed as a clinically proven fat loss solution. 1.5 pound difference over 6 months.
Probably poop that
yeah,
out.
You could drop a turd that big. But this is the kind of thing that will happen. And if you don't look at the paper or the data, you just hear what the press tells you. We won't beat this point home, but one other thing, underpowered studies. So we mentioned you have to have a statistically significant findings in order for things to be relevant. And sometimes they'll be close. They won't quite reach statistical significance like we mentioned in the Women's Health Initiative, but it will get marketed as a potentially effective solution, a potentially effective treatment. And that's not, though. It didn't meet clinical statistical significance. So anyway.
And then the meta-analysis. Do you want to touch on that or no?
So another thing, and if you're into data, people will talk about Cochrane reviews. And basically Cochrane reviews were sort of looked at like this gold standard of, looking at multiple different studies, comparing them to each other and putting the evidence together. But you have to look at the quality of every single study, because combining multiple crappy studies, doesn't create strong evidence. It just exaggerates or aggregates some of the same flaws over and over. So anyway, science isn't just science.
No, it's not. Drivers to this, like we have already talked about, ego, they want to be right all the time, career incentives, some of these people get major financial gains,
their entire career, all their money, their lab, their entire, and you might be talking millions of dollars. Research scientists might make quite a bit of money.
Yeah, especially if they're proven right.
And if if Pfizer is paying you to do Pfizer research, what do you think happens if they come to you multiple times and you don't find what they're looking for with their drug? You think Pfizer's happy?
No. Do you think you're going to go back and repeat that study 5 or 10 times until you find an outcome that Pfizer wants? And you guys, some of these people, because I know how crazy we sound, but let me tell you that we have been through the ringer the last however many years, and this stuff happens, and it happens often. Often. These are whistleblower scientists that have came out and said they've made me repeat this study quite literally 7 or 10 times until I found the report that they wanted. You go back and manipulate data. You go back and manipulate data, and you tweak things, and you can tweak something enough to get your outcome that you want. And then boom, look at this study that came out, and it's like, you didn't release the 10 prior that you burned. Like, these are the things that happen.
And I don't want to sit here and just say Pfizer, because I don't want to get myself in trouble. I'm not an attorney. I'm not sitting here on their board. I haven't looked at their specific data.
Sure.
Any drug company, this is just sort of the way this process works. Yeah. So, listen, don't anybody come after me. I'm just saying, this is the world we live in.
Right. And these are, like I said, these are scientists that we are basically repeating their story of what happened with them. I mean, these are things that you can look up for whistleblower scientists. Yeah. So it's out there, not just making it up.
It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. A political activist, Upton Sinclair, said that.
Yep. That's crazy.
All right. So let's bring this back to medicine. Okay.
Right.
So this is why show me the studies isn't enough anymore. And this is what you, as an informed person, who
can just Google, who has access to Google or an AI platform or something that you can figure out what's going on. And you're going to ask questions like, who funded it? What was measured? What was potentially ignored? What are the flaws? What didn't get published potentially? And most importantly, what would disprove all of this in the study? So,
if this theory can't be challenged, really, this is not science. It's not the scientific method. It's belief. It's cult. It's just blindly following. So you have to be able to challenge this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all the way back to ivermectin.
Yeah.
Our entire
all right.
Well, our
we got off.
podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we didn't get off. I did want to talk about that.
Point.
Yeah, so understanding that whole thing now brings us back to ivermectin. So here we are, we're in 2020, quote unquote, fringe scientists around the world are saying, hey guys, We understand this COVID thing's going crazy. We've found some cool stuff. Here's what it is, ivermectin. And I'll tell you, it's mentioned in the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, but I can vaguely remember this because I've cited it a few times. One study that was super interesting and brought this to the forefront was there was a little nursing home in Italy that had a fungal outbreak, and their entire residents and staff, let's call it like 85 patients, all got treated with ivermectin. Just happened to be
very safe, so they'll prophylactically treat.
So they give it to everybody to treat this fungus parasite. I don't remember what it was.
It was a parasitic infection.
This is a small town in Italy, right? And this happens to be like April of 2020. COVID's running rampant.
Yeah.
I might be a tad off. I think zero patients,
zero deaths.
Zero people died. Zero staff died. And I want to say maybe they said 1 or 2 COVID-related hospitalizations out of 88 nursing home patients.
Potentially
at the time,
compromised
when
patients.
Everyone in a nursing home was literally scared of death at any moment. You couldn't go visit them. Everybody was dropping like flies.
Right.
So anyway, that was one example. There's multiple more, but that's why they started to say, hey, what do we have here?
Yeah, what are we missing?
So anyway, let's set the stage. Ivermectin was around before COVID, right? It was prior to COVID, ivermectin was being used on 200 to 300 million prescriptions annually. Okay. You're talking
year.
A
insane.
Year. Billions of prescriptions written for ivermectin since the 1980s, right? And what's it being treated for? Well, onchocerciasis, which is river blindness, which was very big in certain African countries. Strongyloides, you're getting these different, it would lead to parasitic infections that can lead to elephantiasis, which is also your lymphatic filariasis, scabies, lice, and then just other simple parasitic diseases. In some parts of the world, entire communities were being devastated by these infections. If you had this outbreak happen, blindness, disability, chronic illness, death, and ivermectin literally changed that.
Yeah, it's mass drug administration programs across, Africa, South America, South Asia. It helped dramatically reduce, like Tim said, the river blindness transmission. It, of course, improved quality of life. It saved lives, obviously. And this one, it just wasn't theoretical. This was a drug that was handed out to millions of people safely, mind you, year after year after year.
So much so
that there was a Nobel Prize, and that was in 2015, and it was awarded for discovering the ivermectin.
Yeah. So it was, the retroactive, they were given the Nobel Prize for the discovery leading to ivermectin.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, but, you don't just win a Nobel Prize for a little horse dewormer.
A horse dewormer. Yep. Yeah. It's crazy.
Anyway.
Okay. So mechanism, let's break it down into what does it do?
Quick physiology in case you're asking, okay, how does ivermectin work? So it has a pretty simple mechanism. It targets the glutamate-gated chloride channels that are present in parasites. It causes paralysis to the parasites and they die. Very simply, humans don't have those same channels, those same pathways, which is why it's been so safe and so effective at therapeutic doses. Just like anything else, if you go to significant doses above therapeutic, there are side effects and risks.
Yeah, it's not some mystery compound.
Right.
Very studied, very understood, and still to this day, very widely used.
So fast forward to 2020, there's chaos, there's fear. People, this virus is spreading around the world. As you know, countries are getting shut down. It's a huge pandemic, hospitals overwhelmed, and clinicians start trying things, right? We didn't have anything that was working. So, you hear about this nursing home in Italy where all these people, all right, let's put together. We've got patients in the hospital, right? Like these people are going to die. We have nothing to treat them. Let's try this. Yeah. So they were running ivermectin, dexamethasone, azithromycin, like we said, zinc, vitamin D, and they were getting good results.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't know, it was working very well, guys. It wasn't just working, it was working very well. And once again, in the time frame, we're not talking about, 14 days into it, you're intubated in the ICU, and here you go, here's some IVM and some zinc and some D. It doesn't work like that. But when you have high-risk populations, immunocompromised, these are very, very basic, safe things that why the heck not?
Right.
Why aren't we doing this?
And I think that's part of, what frustrated us so much is why squash this? Why
that
not
was the
try
dead giveaway.
Azithromycin? Do you know how many prescriptions are written for azithromycin for ear infections that don't need it, for sinus infections that aren't bacterial? Almost everybody that walks into an urgent care or an ER complaining of ear pain and sinus pain leaves with azithromycin. But we're not allowed to write it for this deadly disease. We can't try it. They straight up said, you cannot try this.
Yes.
And you're like,
you cannot use it. And that's why I'm saying it's like, that was the immediate dead giveaway. It's like, oh, wow, okay, you're hiding something. That was my immediate dead giveaway. When they attacked us for even trying, You guys, we're trying to save lives. We're throwing the kitchen sink at people. And if it happens to be a dewormer that is so freaking safe that babies can have it, why would I not do that for an 80-year-old loved one? It makes no sense.
Yeah, with a little Decadron, again, we throw that indiscriminately at everybody.
Their biggest thing was because it's not studied. Well, you know what's also not studied? Us, as the clinical trials going on right now for your emergency use vaccination that is going to not have any studies yet either. So what do you want to play Russian roulette with? Because I take the ivermectin, you know?
Right. I'd take the one that's been given 300 million times a year.
With like 0 deaths.
Yeah, over the experimental vaccine. Yeah. But anyway, that's us.
Thank you. I will take that
one. So like Mia said, you couldn't just throw this indiscriminately. There were people like Peter McCullough were doing studies around the world. They were seeing minimal improvements, but you had to start it early. You had to get it in the viral replication phase. You had to get the anti-inflammatory effect, the antiviral effect, and an immune support strategy all at once. And it wasn't saving everybody. People still ended up in the ICU. There were still deaths, but the rates were significant. They mattered. There were effects being done. And these people are screaming, why aren't you listening to me? Why are you silencing me? And the world is just calling them crazy.
And so many of them. I mean, we're talking thousands of providers that stuck their neck out and got it cut off by, pharmaceuticals because they didn't want to be involved in it. And they're like, nope, you're a problem. Let's get rid of you, silence you.
That's the part too. It's so weird. So instead of like, and even if you were like, whoa, guys, this isn't studied, we really need to pump the brakes. Why weren't the top people organizing massive studies of this? Why weren't we like, we need to intensely and aggressively study these things that are showing potential benefit with very well efficacy medications with low side effect risk files. Right. Instead, they were shutting it down and taking your medical license if you said this might work. How does that not make you think what the heck is going on here?
Right.
And so
Yeah. Well, I was just saying about the narrative shift about we say, oh, ivermectin. Nope. It's a horse dewormer. Physicians ridiculed, shamed, licensed, taken away. Discussion. Nope. Not at all.
Yeah. Instead of like, it is a horse dewormer among many other things. And let's study it if there's potential benefit. We know it's safe. It wasn't skepticism. They were mocking us. And, there were things at play. We can only speculate based on what we've read and what we've heard, but there were definitely some things at play, and we can talk about one of them, right here. So what happened to be being developed, at the end of 2020 and into 2021 by the person who was leading, the NIAID.
Yep, the vaccine.
Yeah.
And
so
that was, of course,
COVID's
the emergency use authorization, which essentially means that if you do not have another alternative, that's it. That's okay. It'll immediately be approved if you did not have
if there is no FDA approved, adequate, available alternative for a disease or whatever's happening, then you can get emergency use authorization for a medication.
So I listen. Red flag.
I'm not
saying
the judge and jury here,
but it's a little suspicious.
Yeah, but it's a little suspicious that we had dexamethasone, azithromycin, vitamin D, zinc, ivermectin, and yet all of these things, there was something coming up why we couldn't use them, couldn't try them, couldn't study them. All for this magical vaccine.
Because remember, let's say they did do these studies, and which would take a while, and let's say they said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are right. This is majorly suppressing this disease." Then that emergency use authorization could have never been able to go
that vaccine couldn't be brought to the forefront, and it would have had to go through
that is safer and has been tested.
It would have had to go through years of clinical trials, all the typical things that a drug has to do to come to market.
So once again, for those and like I said, I'm not saying ever, never, ever do this, but I'm saying for those of you who are walking around saying it was a safe and effective, you were the clinical trial in real time. So we cannot say that. You want to say that ivermectin is safe and effective for other disease processes like parasites and things like that.
There were plenty of trials to show it.
So I'll take that all day long. But when you're saying that this is safe and effective, with what data?
Can I just be the one to say here that if you look at the original actual study data, it wasn't safe and it wasn't effective.
Nope,
there were all kinds of side effects. There were all kinds of deaths there, and it was not stopping the spread or the progression of the virus. So at any rate,
we could talk, when I say we could talk for hours, I mean hours.
We need to reel it in a little bit.
We need to reel it in. We could talk for hours on that.
Then, and kind of just another crazy thing to bring up here. So ivermectin is being completely ridiculed, right? And then all of a sudden what comes along? Paxlovid, right? When it's COVID, my doctor said Paxlovid.
I have the commercial burned into my head. Yeah. Well, guess what it does? The same thing, just a different mechanism of action.
Basically the same kind of thing. It's going to block the viral replication. Yep. It's going to prevent, this replication somewhat of the attachment into the cells. Yeah. I mean, it's doing the same thing. Right. They knew ivermectin worked, so they copied it.
Ivermectin, it affects the viral transport to cells. It has the anti-inflammatory properties. It interferes with the replication pathways. And Paxlovid, that was all ivermectin, and Paxlovid will directly block viral replication. So very similar. They are both lowering viral load or blunting disease progression. And Paxlovid immediately came into the making in 2021 with COVID. Very new drug. You're talking, ironically, at the same time as all of this, they're suppressing IVM, which is ivermectin. They're increasing their, the Paxlovid, and it was a brand new drug that was trusted so greatly when ivermectin has been around.
And it's all marketing. It was all marketing. And let's look at the cost. Ivermectin's pennies. Paxlovid, I don't know, upwards of $1,000 of a dose, more than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, the point is, that was kind of also sketchy. You just randomly come out with this, almost the same thing that IVM does. You charge an incredible amount, and that's a new drug too. So. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So, and anyway, one other thing just to say, yes, ivermectin is and was used in animals. So are antibiotics. So are steroids. So is basically half of the medicine human takes are used in animals as well. And calling ivermectin a horse dewormer is like calling amoxicillin a fish tank medicine, right? Okay, yeah, it is used in fish tanks. However, let's talk about the millions of prescriptions in humans every year.
Yep.
But let's be clear about one more thing. We're not necessarily advocating going down to Tractor Supply and picking up that horse paste.
Definitely
there's certainly some differences.
Yeah, there is.
Let's just at least be careful where we're sourcing. Just like anything, you should source your medications appropriately.
Although insane, for those of you guys who don't know, we actually do have horses, and I worm them just like we deworm our children with the seasons and all the things. And I would go to Tractor Supply during this time, and there was a massive warning on there. Say, warning, this is not for human consumption. Mind you, I had to be put on a wait list for them to get in dewormer because it was off the shelves. And then the cow ivermectin was in a locked box. I'm like,
it was.
Oh my gosh. Look at all the problems.
You almost had to prove you had cows to get it.
Yeah, for sure. No, seriously.
I remember
bring your horse to Tractor Supply to get your ivermectin.
It seriously, I was there and I wasn't getting ivermectin, and I heard this guy trying to get it, and he was literally getting questioned like it was a police interrogation about what he was going to do with this ivermectin.
Right, but also look what we're doing. It's such a safe medication.
It was weird.
Oh my gosh. Anyway.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get off of COVID. Let's talk about cancer. People do talk about ivermectin in the cancer realm a little bit. So tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, well, gosh, so this is another thing that I feel like that there's multiple other podcasts on as well, but there is a lot of
there's
good data.
Discussion, data, research, and podcasts on it. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of things. And we're not saying that this is a cure or anything like that, and that anybody should abandon their treatment plan or any sorts, but there definitely is some things there, and it's these certain pathways that can inhibit the metastasis signaling and things like that. It can help repair the mitochondrial stress, apoptosis, which is programmed cellular death. So, for example, your body being able to recognize these bad cells and being able to program to target to die. There are a lot of stories out there of people who have had great success with this. We're talking like glioblastomas. I know some ovarian cancers, some blood cancers. Those are the most common ones that ivermectin works very well in. But those are just some things that I strongly urge you to. A lot of my more holistic friends that have been using ivermectin, they've been doing great. I actually have a friend right now. She's surviving in a cancer state. And
let's be clear, though. It's not just ivermectin.
No,
this is a multi-pronged strategy to approach. And sometimes it does include traditional chemotherapy and radiation as well.
Sure.
So I think, the way I would approach this is not a proven cancer treatment, but it's mechanistically interesting. Right. And there's good early data out there to say, hey, we should look at this more.
Correct. And my biggest point is if something is so well studied and so safe, and it's not going to do harm to take it in an appropriate dose, and you have the risk to help cancer cells or help get rid of them, I guess I should say, then why not? Why not try it with your treatment plan with, of course, a healthy lifestyle?
It also comes back to, like you said, informed consent, right? So if you're having a discussion with a physician who's saying, hey, I don't know what ivermectin does. I don't know if it's going to help you. There's only early data on it. But if you feel the risk or the benefit outweighs the risk, you're an adult. You have capacitance for decision making. You understand risk and benefit. Sure, go ahead. Let's try it. I'm not telling you to stop your chemo or your radiation. Maybe you do choose to do that. Again, You know the risks and you know the benefits. But let's talk about it, just real quick. What are some of the pathways? Because these are the trigger words in cancer, and this is what you need to know. You mentioned apoptosis, which is cell death. So ivermectin can actually help trigger damaged or abnormal cells to self-destruct. So starting off that apoptotic cascade.
Yeah. Remember, your body is very smart, but it has to have the ability to recognize things to target for self-destruction.
And it needs signals, yeah.
The other one thing is autophagy. So the natural cellular cleanup that our body does, dysregulated in cancer. Of course, cancer cells are producing at a rapid or slow amount, and that is a dysregulation of the autophagy. So an inability to destroy those cells.
Yeah, and ivermectin can come in and maybe help restore that order. Ivermectin may disrupt mitochondrial function in abnormal cells, which is what's kind of cool about it. It's actually not really disrupting that electron transport chain or function in normal cells, but in these cancer cells with different transcription factors, different signals, it's actually able to interact there. And cancer cells rely heavily on these altered energy pathways. Ivermectin can step in and cut off the juice.
And there is some data to show that it can also potentially impact some cancer signaling pathways. So basically, key growth and survival pathways in tumors, it can help suppress those or make those no longer the signaling accurate. So then you can have the cell death of these cancer cells. Very cool.
Yeah. And so far we've talked about cell growth and death, but what about also talking about cell evasion? Because this is a concept you like and you talk about with your patients a little bit, right? How tumors sort of create this protective microenvironment.
Yeah, it's really cool. And unfortunately, tumors have the ability to do that, which is basically, you can't see me, so you can't do anything about it type thing. Or maybe your body can, but just because of these films that you can't, they're hiding. But the core concept, like Tim said, these tumors will create that protective, microenvironment for them. And pathogens in abnormal cells can form that biofilm. And of course, then we can't recognize them. So why ivermectin can fit into this is that it's been studied for the antimicrobial and anti-biofilm effects. Limited, but still an interesting concept if we can break down the biofilms and things like that. And then, of course, like we discussed, it can alter that cellular signaling and then that membrane transport that is so very crucial. So the idea here is if you disrupt the protection of the cancer cell, then you can potentially improve that immune visibility. Oh, look, there's a bad guy. Let's grab that and get rid of it.
And that's where I think it really can, sort of interact with traditional Western medicine and treatments, right? We have all kinds of different cancer treatments that affect your T helper cells, maybe increase, this immune response. Sometimes it's decreasing the immune response. But the point is, what if we can find a way for these things to work in harmony? Maybe chemotherapy in modified or less doses since it's so toxic. Maybe radiation comes in as well. Maybe ivermectin plus some sort of immunomodulator team up, break down the biofilm, and now your immune system can suppress it. So this is where there's so much cool data. Like we really have to look at this a little bit more in the future, and just you got to be open to it as a scientific community.
You do. And unfortunately, the reality check here is that most data, the cell studies or animal models and human cancer data is very limited. It's still ongoing. It's there, which is great. Good hope there. But I mean, this goes right back to the theory. Are we really going to try to cure cancer like this in its mass quantity, as cancer is such a huge disease process? And unfortunately,
it's a huge business.
Money maker.
Yeah, it's a huge business. So are we going to cure cancer with a drug that costs pennies on the dollar?
Yeah, are they really going to push these studies if we come to that?
Can we ask the question, are we even going to cure cancer?
I don't think so. It's one of the biggest payouts. Why would a business chop off the head of the snake when if something is so progressively year after year profitable, why in the heck would you ever want to find what's going to fix that? And ask yourself that, guys. This isn't just like, oh, you guys are those type of people. Seriously,
Oh, you want to know the type of people we are? I used to say, if we can put a man on the moon, we can cure cancer. However, meet my wife. Go ahead, tell her.
Hello. Anyway, so getting back to that,
she doesn't think we went to the moon.
Well, not the
Newsflash.
The first time, guys, for real. You think when we had dial-up,
I shouldn't have done it. I'm sorry.
Live streamed this so everybody could see. I'm not saying we never went to the moon. I'm highly questioning
the whole moonwalk, the thing on TV back in 1969.
Yeah, when my mom picked up the phone and cut out my internet, I don't.
In 1969,
like I'm saying, as things like when I was that young.
That was 30 years later.
I know, but I'm saying that's what happened when I was that young. So imagine 30 years prior to that, you think that they had that stuff figured out? Come on, guys.
All
This
right.
is the thing where I'm saying, like, once you get like a little bit of that critical thinking, you're gone. You're too far gone. So anyway, there is some hope into this.
I knew I
but
shouldn't have done it.
I don't feel like this is going to be super, fruitful, meaning in the mass media where it's like breaking news, ivermectin is curing cancer. However, this is where I'm saying, listen, if you guys are holistic, you like the more natural approach, you want to do things, everything you can to obviously survive, then why the heck not throw the kitchen sink at you if there's some data there? And there are also books and podcast on not only ivermectin but fenbendazole, where you can look up protocols. And like I said, do this at your own risk.
And not
This
only
is not
ivermectin or fenbendazole, but more holistic approaches to treating cancer.
Sure,
Yeah,
for sure.
And there's how not to die is not cancer. What's the one? How to starve cancer, right? I think that's what it's called.
And then there's
A World Without Cancer. That's more specific to vitamin B17.
Yes, amygdalin and how the FDA completely blocked that. And go read that book. If you want to know what we're talking about our studies and how they manipulate data and how they get rid of medicine that's finding cures, go read the book A World Without Cancer. It makes sense, guys.
It's interesting.
We're not saying for you guys to hate every provider or all the science. We're just saying use your noggin, because the real life scenarios here, don't just believe everything that you hear and read.
I have a quick
yourself.
cool story. So I was in the emergency room probably about a year ago, and I had this cancer patient. So one of the hospitals I work at, they have a cancer center upstairs, and often we'll get people down for hydration or they just are really sick and we need to assess them in the ER. And I was talking to this really sweet lady, and she was upstairs for chemo. She came down. She was feeling like crap. And I can't really remember if she was terminal or if her cancer was progressing or something, but you could tell she was hopeless. And I just said, hey, have you ever looked at some alternative strategies like, avoiding sugar? I just talked about basic stuff. I said acai tea, avoiding sugar, eating apricot seeds, just some things you can do to take your health into your own hands. Right. And I'm telling you, this lady lit up like a Christmas tree. She was like, yes. She started talking. She's like, nobody's ever said this to me before. Like, and I just had a simple conversation with her. I didn't suggest she quit traditional medicine. We just talked about some alternative strategies. And before she left the ER that day, she was just crying. She grabbed my hand. She said, I just want you to know you gave me hope, and I was like, and that's a powerful thing for someone who's dying.
It goes back to, I have a friend who's living with stage 4 breast cancer. And I don't know if she listens to our podcast or not, but she's such an inspiration because, they did not give her basically a survival rate. They were just like, this is going to be the end all be all. And she is still living today, fully functioning. Scans are great. But when I say she dived all, I mean, she dove in. She did a little bit of the Western medicine as, her informed consent. She studied on everything, read up on everything, but then went way down the deep dive of everything. No alcohol, high dose vitamin C, everything that you can do naturally. And she's gave herself the absolute best chance of survival. And she's still living today, running and working out, doing marathons with, stage 4 breast cancer. It is insane.
And so, just the food for thought as we leave this conversation, ivermectin, fenbendazole, just alternative approaches. If a loved one, if a friend is suffering from cancer, just know, hey, you can educate yourself. There are other things you can do in parallel, adjunct to traditional Western medicine. And just to throw a few things out there, we mentioned a couple of books already, but think of things like proteolytic enzymes. Think of NAC, think of berberine, curcumin, ECGC green tea, melatonin, vitamin D. All of these things out there.
Immune system, good gut health, avoiding alcohol, avoiding deli meats, things that are directly known for cancer causing and carcinogens. Lowering your toxic load. This all ties in perfectly to everything that we preach every week, and it's your health is in your hands. And of course, as you know, our podcast is called Health Without the System. And if you don't take anything home from today, take home that you still have a say and you have more power than you give yourself when you just do a little bit more digging, meaning don't get stuck into a system where you feel so helpless because you're just trusting the doctor, or worse, just trusting the science. Because I hope that this podcast gave you some hope to say, maybe there's a different path for whatever you're dealing with, whether that's just high blood pressure, whether that's something that's so basic that we see every day. It's like there's studies out there to show that there's food or Brazil nuts that can lower your blood pressure as well as a standard dose of lisinopril. You have your hands or your health in your own hands. And we really hope that we get that across every single podcast that we do for you guys, that you don't have to be stuck in the system. You guys can have a say, and you really should be getting true informed consent from whoever you're seeing.
Yeah. And remember, our system's probably built more for sick care than preventive medicine. So a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. Taking these preventive strategies can prevent you from getting to a point where you are stuck in the system and where you do have to rely on more traditional Western medicine. So real quick before we sign off, this is another thing we get a lot: cleanses, ivermectin with cleanses, parasitic cleanses. We did a whole episode on this, so let's not rehash
Parasites,
it.
yep.
But in case someone hasn't heard it, or just for a refresh because it's been a little while, what do you say when people bring up ivermectin and cleanses?
Well, you can definitely use more natural stuff. I typically, for our household, we do one about 3 times a year, preferably with the season change and cycled with the full moon. And we can use natural stuff. We're not talking big guns because, I mean, we're not riddled with parasites, but we live on a farm. And if you eat sushi, have dogs, have cats, I mean, we have goats, chickens, turkeys, all the things. So we just do it because we obviously have parasites.
Yeah, we have turkeys now.
Yeah, well, they're wild. But then I put bird seeder outside, and we have about 20 plus turkeys that are in our yard anyway. Anyway, so natural stuff that you can use in combination, the best to pair that with things like wormwood, black walnut, clove, oregano, olive leaf, berberine. These are all things that you can continue to supplement as like a cycle. Or remember, eat your medicine. Eat a little bit more garlic. Put a little bit more oregano oil in some things. Start to cook different to use your medicine.
And if you go look at some of the big cleanses out there, these things online that are selling for maybe $90 to $120. Guess what's in them, guys? Black walnut, oregano oil, olive leaf.
And some of them are just a single ingredient.
Some of them are one.
Like $80 for one herb.
When you could go on Amazon and get like the black walnut for $19.99 or whatever it is. So anyway, point being,
listen to our parasite one.
Yeah, we have had some people ask about ivermectin. It's not that you can't use that, but honestly, you don't really always need to jump to that. That might be for more, prolonged or worse, far along infections. If it's showing up in labs and you're critically
symptomatic, and not when I say critically, I don't mean that, but
remember, you have to fix the terrain first. We've talked about the 5 R's, right? Where you have to get rid of, some of these bad things first before you can start to replant the garden. So always think of things like gut motility. Think of your bile flow through your intestines, the microbiome, what supports your entire gut flora before jumping into a kill everything, parasitic cleanse, kind of things like that. Anyway.
Yep. All right. Well, you want to do a little closing here? Bottom line here, ivermectin, we're not saying that it might not be a miracle drug, although I beg to differ, that changed a lot of freaking lives. But it's not a joke, and it was, disrespected and disregarded, for many, many years, and when it really could have been needed by a lot of freaking people who were really sick and near death, and we could have prevented this a lot differently.
I think so. I think the outcome could have been different.
I really think that the public health was not.
This was a medication that clearly and scientifically proven to have changed global health, and it had early signals in COVID that were buried. And instead of open discussion, a narrative came about in the media, on social media especially, and you were either on one side or the other. And obviously, a very large amount of people were on a side that.
And look at the division that it did to even friends and family. It's just wild. And it's like, why are we fighting over this? If you want to go take the shot, have at it. If you want to take ivermectin, have at it. But I'll be darned if you don't have informed consent on which one you want to do, because sometimes things are irreversible. And you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
If you chose the latter.
So I hope you stuck with us through this. Maybe a little bit of our crazy came out today, but that's okay. We like to think about these things. We like to talk about these things. We also encourage you to do your own research. We are not your sole, knowledge of medicine or outside of medicine. Listen to other podcasts, read other books. Don't, we'll read our disclaimer in a minute, but don't go changing your health without talking to your physician or other people. This is, a discussion. It's not meant to be medical advice. So please, while we enjoy and we thank you for coming along, please know this is our opinion based on our research and our experiences.
Yep. And your doctor should be a partnership with you, not
Agreed.
a superior, this is end all be all, and that's it. So just remember
I
that,
hate
guys.
so much when people say, like,
too.
my doctor won't let me
no. I'm
do
like,
this.
what is that? What does that even mean?
Then fire them because they're not your boss.
Right. And it's not like we're still, like I said, we're not like we're drug seeking, but it's like there's obviously some people who might need to be fired. But the majority of people who just want to know what's going on with their health and want to have other options, and their only provider, this is only one option and that's it. Like, that's just not acceptable. That's just
they can't have it's not an open mind.
Anyway.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yep, absolutely. And then just a quick rundown here of our website. We have some new things coming. We have a women's and men's vitamin now as well. You can check us out at rixahealth.com, the shop tab. And we have some other things like amino acids, our whey protein, all the things. And then we also have our newest product, which I love. We've been working with some of our
It's a
really
brand partnership. Yeah.
some of our really great friends that we've hung out with often, they are very what we would consider crunchy and natural like us, and they have came up with their own some lotion, some hydrating cream, and my favorite is going to be their sunscreen. We make our own non-toxic sunscreen. We've been pushing them to do it, and they did it. So you guys can check out on the shop tab. They have their select products that are available.
Check them out as well. They're called Granola Crew.
Crew.
You can find them at granolacrew.com. You can also find them at rixahealth.com.
And you can also check out their Instagram, I believe, as well.
Yes. So thank you very much for tuning in. Please like, share, and follow. If you think someone might like this, tell them to check us out. Give us a listen. Reach out to us for questions or concerns.
Thank you, guys. This podcast is for educational and conversation only. It is not medical advice. It is not a replacement for personalized care, diagnosis, and or treatment. Always talk with your own healthcare provider before making changes to your health, medications, and or lifestyle. Our goal is to give you better questions, better understanding of disease, and more ownership of your health. Knowledge is power. We will see you guys next week.
And I won't have my pH meter next time.
And hopefully not be hiccuping.